So you've probably experienced a conversation with a man where you weren't actually asking him for advice or even information. You weren't asking him to teach you. You weren't asking for his assessment. You weren't asking for his opinion. In fact, you may know considerably more than him about a particular subject than he does. And yet somehow he assumes the position of correction. And this is something that happens quite often. It's this invisible contract around female inferiority and women needing correction. And it's something that I see in conversation, both offline and online, often, quite frankly. And we're going to talk about that today in this video, because invisible contracts govern the choices, the desires, and the actions of women. And here on Unpunishable Woman, that is one of the main things that we talk about, how these invisible contracts are showing up in women's lives and how we can identify them, choose to break them so that we can go on to kind of liberate ourselves, essentially. And there are multiple spheres within which I see this invisible contract playing out. It starts from girlhood, and we're going to talk about that in this video. Now, you can download the Invisible Contract. It's completely free, by the way. The Invisible Contract Foundation Framework download. This allows you to privately reflect on the invisible contracts that might be governing your life and decide which ones you would actually like to break. Now, here's the thing. So many times I grew up in a religion whereby maleness carries authority. Just because a man is a man, they have authority. And often in their positions of authority inside this religion, they are correcting and counseling women because there are more women than men in that religion. And so what you'll find is from childhood, even in the culture, those men are taught that women need correction. Okay, that they have the right to correct those women and that their correction is automatically valid and holds authority. Now, of course, if you're in the religion and you prescribe to its culture, rules and norms, then of course, as a woman, you are often taught that, in fact, the way you receive correction and counsel is a reflection of your character, your spiritual maturity, and therefore, quite often, even if you are being incorrectly corrected, even if that person has no standing to correct you, you are still being judged by your response and the nature of your response and how enthusiastic you are to receive that correction. And we see this playing out in other spheres as well. I mean, just before we move off of religion, one of the things that you see quite often that Christians in particular will discuss is the fact that it was because of Eve's disobedience. Because Eve ate the fruit in the book of Genesis, that is why sin entered into the world. And so you'll find that there's a lot of these Christian religions and churches that will often talk about the fact that women are what? Rebellious. Women are independent thinkers, and the results of that female independence and rebellience is fatal. In fact, it has been fatal for all of humankind, but because of Eve's sin, okay, and independent thinking, her rebellious actions, that is why human beings get sick and die. And so a lot of these religions carry these themes through to justify the fact that they like to strip women of their rightful self-authority over themselves as adults, because the idea goes that women need to be corrected, and that when women are not corrected, they get up to all. I can't tell you the number of times in and outside religion I hear this rhetoric. This is why at times you'll hear, especially men, say, well, she doesn't know her place. Now, what place could that be when you're an adult woman? An adult woman who thinks and functions like an adult, who conducts herself accordingly, whose habits, lifestyle, and patterns reflect a certain level of maturity, mental maturity, emotional maturity, financial competence, when you're respected by colleagues, friends, and family. What kind of correction? And you see, and when I talk like this, a lot of the time what happens, and this has been my whole life, okay, men will say, well, what makes you think you're, yes, actually, I am an adult. I'm not a child. I therefore don't need to be corrected, and I don't need somebody to assume the authority in place to correct me. Now, use your critical thinking here, because what often happens in response is that people will say, well, you know, everyone needs to take feedback. Nobody's perfect. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about permission-based feedback in the work setting. If a manager or a leader gives you feedback, we're talking about when you are an adult, he is an adult, you are peers. You are not a child. This is why I'm always encouraging women to move into psychological adulthood. Because if you behave like a child, it doesn't take much for a misogynistic man to start treating you like one mentally. Because a lot of the time men are conditioned and programmed into believing that women are hysterical, they are erratic, they are unreliable, that our hormones rule us entirely. We have no common sense, we cannot retain any kind of logic, okay, because of our hormones, and that we can't separate fact from feeling. That is a lie. And those are invisible contracts that we are conditioned into obeying and complying with from childhood. And so when I always talk about this self-authority piece, I'm really saying nobody has the authority to correct you when you're an adult. I'm talking about a man deciding that because he's a man, he can correct you. No. No. And let's not even get into the way it's often done. All right? It's really important to, let's acknowledge. And by the way, correction is not the same as connection. If you're looking to get to know somebody, if you are intentionally building and creating intimacy as two people, emotional intimacy, whereby you share things, you exchange things, you give feedback, okay? That is about building connection. That is not about stripping someone of their self-authority. That is definitely not about stripping them of their dignity, removing their agency and autonomy. And like I say, you would have noticed that I talked about permission. It's one of the things that, for example, when you are trained as a coach, everything is permission-based. That's one of the reasons why in my coaching sessions, when I run them, I'll say, are you open to me giving you feedback? Are you open to me sharing an observation? And my observation is not a verdict, right? People will invite you and give you permission to do those things in a coaching setting. And to be honest, I take that outside of the setting, and I've learned over the years, maturity. It's not all the time that you give unsolicited commentary. No. Because if you are seeking connection, then there are different ways that you do that. But what I often have heard and observed and often experienced, and I know I'm not the only one, is men assuming unearned authority to correct you. And they get very annoyed. And this is immature men and misogynistic men and then ignorant men. Because, I mean, everybody's misogynistic, right? But the point is there's a spectrum here. And so there'll be men who bristle when you tell them, you can't correct me. You don't have the authority to, number one. And that is one of the reasons why there are men from certain schools of thoughts and background, particularly if it's religious, that they love and relish, okay, those scriptures in the Bible that talk about the head of household, because in their mind, that's about obedience, compliance, and you accepting correction from them, which is bizarre to me. It's very bizarre, because actually as two adults, I mean, you know, you've got to have yourself in check to be able to correct somebody else, to be fair. But it is what it is. All right? And so it is really important that if you're seeking connection, or someone says they're seeking connection with you, there are certain ways that they simply would not behave towards you. Right? You can exchange information. Two adults can say to each other, you know, I think you're wrong, or I felt this way when this happened. But actually, the only real settings within which correction is given, like I said, it's usually parent to child, teacher to student, because in an educational setting, there is a hierarchy, there is authority, professional expert to novice, authority to subordinate. So you're thinking about, I don't know, a court of law, for example. There is an assumed and accepted difference in rank, although, of course, intrinsic human value remains. So really and truly, if a man does not have greater expertise, responsibility, or authority, and you haven't given that to him, he has no right to correct you. And this is the world that we live in, which has given maleness itself unearned authority. When you're an adult woman, and this is why I always say, move into psychological adulthood, for starters. Now, that doesn't prevent a man from thinking he can correct you, but what it does is, one, you can notice when it's happening, and two, there's literally no grounds for it, because it's not like you're behaving like a child. You're not thinking like a child. So what would give him the impression that that was needed? This is one of the areas for me in the past. I don't date now. I don't need to live in my sanctuary and home constantly being corrected by someone simply because I'm a woman. Because it's a very distinct dynamic. And historically, maleness and male authority has been institutionalized, okay? So it means that individual men can inherit the posture of authority. Because like I say, not all men are the same, and there's intersectionality even within maleness. But what you'll find is it's something that men pick up on, that they have the right to correct women. And they will often do it subconsciously, by the way. I listen to stories from women who say that, for example, actually on TikTok, there was a lady, she is, I believe she's a scholar or an archaeologist, and she specializes in Egyptian history. And she was saying that there was a man that she went out on a date with, and he refused to believe or accept. He kept telling her that we don't know who built the pyramids, when it's very well documented, quite frankly. She Googled it, he didn't believe her. Then he went and Googled it and said, oh, yes, you're right. We see this play out time and time and time again, where women are corrected by men who don't know what they're talking about. And like I say, they don't even have the authority. And when you reject that unearned authority that a man tries to assume, it will cause a ripple at the very least. And they do feel it energetically. It's one of the reasons why, I had to depart from my old religion. Because quite often, the men believe that they have a right to talk to you in a certain way. They have a right to tell you what they think. Meanwhile, they do not. And for me, being an unmarried woman, I don't have a head of household, for starters. And like I say, unless the place that you think I should be in is the place that I believe I am in as a human being with intrinsic value, i.e. I deserve to be dignified and respected, there is no other place I should be. When you say get back into place, I'm in that place. That's where I'm at. Right? You have to understand the difference between these two things. Now, let's look at this female life cycle of correction, okay? So from girlhood, the idea is, really, if you're following the script, is that you are a child, so parental correction is legitimate. And that parental correction, if you have two parents and one of them is a father, comes from the father, okay? And so gender does give it another dimension. The father isn't simply a parent. He is often understood to be the head of the household. And this is, many cultures have this set up, and then you add in religion, it's right there. Now, a good daughter is obedient. She's humble, she's respectful, she accepts correction, guidance, and direction, instruction that is given by the father. She doesn't talk back, she doesn't challenge, she doesn't question. And a lot of men have been brought up in those environments. They may have watched their mother behave in this way, their sisters be treated in this way. And so they assume in their adult life, when they're interacting with women, that all women must and will behave in those same ways. Otherwise, you're not being soft, feminine, and womanly. I've heard that many a time, which is funny because I've got an adult brain. It works, it functions. So of course I'm going to ask questions. I'm not a child. And me asking questions isn't necessarily always that I'm challenging you. I'm asking a question. But it is often taken and seen as a challenge. To what though? Because you're not an authority here. So why would it be a challenge to you? We're two adult peers having a conversation. We're two adult peers having a conversation. I remember a one and only date that I went on with a man. He basically told me that, if we get together, and I thought, steady on, that's presumptuous because no. But he said, if we get together, he said, I will never wear contraception, you will have to take. I said, I really don't understand. You cannot give me a directive about my body, my safety, my comfort, my convenience. And he didn't like that. And when I had to break down to him how out of place, inappropriate that was, he eventually said, well, that's not the way I meant it. I said, that is exactly what you meant. Because if I didn't challenge you, we wouldn't be having this conversation at all. You cannot tell me what to do with my body, and on top of that, based on your comfort and what feels good for you. Absolutely not. All right? And he attempted to correct me around what contraception. I said, hold on a minute, have you ever taken contraception? No. So what are you really saying to me? So you have never taken any contraception, any hormonal contraception. So you've never experienced the side effects. And at that point I was getting irritated because I had no intention of being in a relationship with him anyway. So this is all presumptuous conversation. But aside from that, it's a posture. And when you call it out, it will ruffle some feathers. You do not have the authority to correct me. And what I will also say here is that I always find it very interesting that they even want it. Why are you choosing to be with somebody who you know is an adult, but you want to be correcting them? That makes you feel more of a man in yourself. There's something going on there. For me, the fact that you desire to correct me or you want me to be open to you correcting me because I'm a woman is crazy. Because I don't think about correcting a man. That's the last thing that comes to my mind. If I have to give feedback or I have to have a conversation, that's one thing. But I don't look at men and think, oh, you deserve to be corrected by me because you're a man. No. Right? Now, as you grow from girlhood into womanhood, again, if you're following the social script and obeying the invisible contracts, okay, girls aren't really expected to graduate into autonomous adulthood, right? You're meant to go from your parents' home into your husband's home, and you will then have a head of household. You will have this husbandly owner. So you don't graduate from parental authority and move into having self-authority. No, really, authority is transferred. That's why, the father gives the daughter away in marriage. So it moves from father to husband, obedient daughter to submissive, humble wife. That is the pipeline. Male headship remains. The man occupies that position. It's just the man changes from father to husband. And this is borne out in legal and economic history, by the way. This is not made up. This is not a one-off. In fact, in many places in the world, it's still like that right now, okay? Ultimately, women were assets and property. They were passed on, right? They were owned, effectively, economically and legally. And it's only of late, we're talking 55 odd years, that a married woman could have some type of independence legally and financially. It's only been 55 years as a woman that you could have your own bank account. Okay, that your access to credit and financial services and resources as a separate person that's very recent. So this is not about interpersonal relationships. On a systemic structural level, that has been the pipeline for women since the beginning of time, and therefore you're kept in a childlike state, whether that be legal, social, or cultural, whereby there is this norm that women are to be corrected by men. They need to be contained, they need to be controlled. The amount of times I hear men say, well, when you leave women to their own devices, what do you mean? What do you mean? When an adult woman, is living her life? Deciding for herself? That is not strange. That is a rightful exercise of self-authority as an adult. All right? And so it's very important, even when it comes down to opinion sharing. I remember when I used to talk about this on TikTok in more detail, there would be men in the comments saying, well, what do you mean? Why doesn't his opinion matter? No, nobody else's opinion can be more relevant and significant than the one you have of yourself. Your very identity and intrinsic value and worth should not be swayed by the opinion of a man. It doesn't matter who he is. He does not have authority over your worth, your value, your identity. That sits with you. That sits with you. And when you move through into a place of psychological adulthood, you do not automatically defer to a man's opinion of you. If he says you're blue, you're red, it doesn't matter. You should know who you are, regardless of what he says and what he thinks and what he believes. You must have your own intrinsic sense of self. And this is one of the reasons why, if I'm very honest with you, some of my past experiences, which have always been enlightening, because for me, they've always been I've just found them interesting. I don't take anything seriously in that particular realm, quite frankly. But it does make it, because what you're doing is showing up as a peer. And this is not about being aggressive. It's not about, and I hate that, a woman who has a strong sense of self, okay, who is mature mentally and emotionally. And when you are able to clearly articulate how you feel, what you think, what you believe, and that is not open to negotiation. Your self-worth should never be open to negotiation. Your sense of self, never open to negotiation. When you operate and move from that place, it does mean that you are the one making decisions. One actually said to me, and you know what? There's always you can always see a pattern and a theme amongst the men who would tell women that they need to be soft. It's usually the men who want to take liberties. It's usually the men who want to be able to exploit you. They do want to see the door ajar. And the words that they use is that it's such a shame you could be softer. No. One thing I'm not soft about is my self-respect. You will not disrespect me and there be no consequences. And because I'm willing to walk away all of the time, it's really not by force, it's not mandatory, okay? Being in a relationship, being in any interaction with a man, in fact, is never going to be more important than my self-respect and dignity. It's not negotiable. And because I don't orbit the desire to have a relationship, I orbit my self-respect. So when I am assessing the way somebody treats me, the way they speak to me, the way they're dealing with me, I am assessing it in the midst of orbiting my self-respect. I am not prioritizing this future relationship and no. Because that is not bigger, it's not more important than how I see myself. This is part of the problem. Because for you, being in any relationship with any man is more important than anything else, then of course you will lose yourself. You won't even know who you are. And your self-respect doesn't even become something that you are factoring in. Your own dignity doesn't matter anymore because you are orbiting this future relationship by any means necessary. And there's often, as I said, this kind of theme and pattern amongst the men who've ever said to me, you could be softer. What for? I can be soft about things that need to be soft, but my self-respect is not one of them. You cannot come and disrespect me without consequences. And when I say that, I'm not referring to anger or aggression. I'm referring to me responding like an adult in a very measured way. Okay? That's it. Now, you have to decide for yourself how you want to exercise your self-authority. Okay? If you make a point and it's ignored, okay? If you're given unsolicited instruction, I can't tell you the number of times I've been in business now for myself for 10 years, and there'll be a man who's never run a business himself telling me nonsense. And we're not in a business studies class where there's a teacher who teaches business studies but has never had a business themselves. It's not that. Didn't ask me whether I needed any help, what I needed help on, just proceeds to tell me things I already know, quite frankly. Yeah? A man's judgment cannot be or have greater relevance and significance than your own. Yes? Sometimes a man may think that you need his approval before you can make the decision. No, you can't. Uh, when I bought one of my previous cars, I'd always planned on buying it, went and bought it, you know, that was that. And one day I pulled up and the guy said to me, oh, you didn't say anything, you didn't tell me you were buying a car, you didn't ask me. I thought, why would I ask? I said, why would I ask you? I'm an adult, it's my money, it's my decision. Why would I need approval? I don't need to consult someone to make this decision, and I certainly don't need to consult just any man. Right? You should have a sense of self, ultimately. You say one thing, he says, that's not really what you mean, or maybe you mean this, or no. I mean what I said. I said what I meant. I know me better than you know me. And like I said, often because you're a woman, because you are disobeying, essentially, these invisible contracts, that you are always open and willing to receive correction from a man just because you're a woman, you will be labeled as conceited, bolshy, aggressive, independent. I hear it all the time, especially from men in religions. The question is, who gave you your authority? Nobody gave you that authority over me as an adult woman. I am not a child. And so understand that when you seek to break these kind of invisible contracts, you can do it in whatever way works for you. You don't have to use the same language. You don't have to, you can choose your tone of voice. You can choose your gesture. It's all up to you. But understand that you do not have to allow yourself to be corrected by somebody who does not have the authority to correct you in the first place. Now, as we wrap up today, what I will say is what you'll tend to find, and this is something I've observed very often in my work, coaching and training, is that women start to correct themselves before somebody else can get the chance to correct them, especially if you grew up in an environment that was very critical. And actually, you often don't need a man physically in the room with you for this dynamic to play out, because you can internalize this authority. You can bring the voices of parents, of brothers, of whoever into the mind here. And so you're always asking yourself, are you sure? You self-doubt yourself. You question yourself. You think maybe you're missing something. Okay, what will he think? A lot of women are thinking about what a man they've never met will think of them when they're making decisions in the here and now as an adult, because that's something that girls are always conditioned to do. Well, what will your husband think? You need to be able to do this for your husband. Well, you don't want your husband to think this. A man that's looking for a wife, he doesn't want you to wear that. He doesn't want you to go here. He doesn't want you to travel there. You can't have those hobbies. You can't have those desires. You can't have those interests. So a lot of the time you will self-correct internally before there's even a man on the scene, because you have not exercised that muscle of trusting your own interpretation, trusting yourself, essentially. So that's why you always seek opinion, and another one, and another one. Yeah? Because you haven't practiced self-authority. And actually you do or might be associating male authority with correctness itself. With correctness itself. And this is why it's so important that we practice relocating that self-authority. Because I say sometimes it's not just a man in terms of a romantic relationship, it's maleness that is associated with correctness. And you are an adult woman.